Le SIAAP assure une mission de service public pour produire et distribuer de l'eau potable aux habitants de son territoire. En 2020, il dessert 151 communes pour près de 4,7 millions d'usagers. Il distribue 800 millions de litres d'eau par jour, principalement grâce à ses 3 usines de traitement d'eau superficielle de la Seine, la Marne et l'Oise. Le patrimoine du SIAAP inclut par ailleurs 5 usines de production d'eau à partir de nappes souterraines, assurant un service minimum en cas de crise. Il est le plus grand service public d'eau potable français et l'un des tout premiers en Europe. En 2020, le SIAAP a mis en œuvre les moyens nécessaires pour assurer la continuité de ce service public essentiel. La mobilisation sans faille des agents du SIAAP pendant cette période complexe montre son engagement auprès des territoires et des usagers. Il a notamment continué à effectuer plus de 420 000 analyses pour surveiller son eau et garantir une qualité d'eau irréprochable. Dès mars 2020, tous les usagers du SIAAP étaient rassurés sur la qualité de l'eau délivrée, un service essentiel qui l'est encore davantage lorsque les populations sont confinées et au moment où se laver les mains régulièrement est l'un des gestes barrières les plus importants comme rempart contre la transmission de la maladie. Pour assurer la maintenance et le renouvellement régulier de ces infrastructures, le SIAAP a investi 91 millions d'euros en travaux cette année, mais aussi pour soutenir l'activité économique de son territoire. En 2020, le SIAAP a poursuivi ses études visant à étendre la technologie d'osmose inverse basse pression, OIBP, à ses usines d'Arvigny, Méry-sur-Oise, Choisy-le-Roi et Neuilly-sur-Marne. Le projet, vers une eau pure sans calcaire et sans chlore, a pour objectif de délivrer une eau toujours plus pure, très douce, agréable à boire, sans perturbateurs endocriniens et sans résidus plastiques. Le SIAAP poursuit son action pour maintenir sa neutralité carbone et s'inscrire dans les objectifs du plan climat-eau-énergie en réutilisant la chaleur produite par ses installations et en compensant ses émissions résiduelles de gaz à effet de serre. Ces innovations permettent au SIAAP de toujours délivrer une eau d'excellente qualité au bénéfice de tous, à un prix maîtrisé, en baisse de 10 centimes au 1er janvier 2020, revenu au prix en vigueur en 1998. Acteur de proximité solidaire, le SIAAP se mobilise pour aider les foyers fragilisés sur ces territoires. Il consacre 1% des recettes de vente d'eau, soit 2,5 millions par an, à son programme Eau solidaire. Au-delà des frontières, le SIAAP a contribué en 2020 à 21 opérations dans 14 pays pour plus de 2 millions d'euros. Parce qu'il est un acteur performant, engagé et durable au service des collectivités territoriales et des habitants, le SIAAP entretient et garde la confiance de ses membres. Année d'élection, 2020 salue l'arrivée de nouveaux délégués. 4 sessions de formation leur ont permis de se former au fonctionnement et aux enjeux du service public de l'eau malgré la crise sanitaire. Les nouveaux délégués ont réélu André Santini président et ont engagé leurs réflexions et leurs débats sur le choix du mode de gestion à l'horizon 2024. En s'appuyant sur les études menées en toute transparence par une équipe pluridisciplinaire et indépendante. En anticipant les enjeux d'avenir, le SIAAP se positionne comme un acteur innovant, performant et durable au service des collectivités territoriales et des citoyens.
Good afternoon, dear participants. It's a great pleasure to welcome you in this second technical and technological solution session. The session chair is Mr. Régis Moiron, who is a professor at the University of Paris-Créteil, l'ASU. Mr. Moiron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, François. So I'm Régis Moiron, researcher at l'ASU, a research lab dealing with the issues of water in urban areas. My playground is Paris, and I'm leading this second session on technical and technological solution. And the fourth presentation of the second part of the session will give us insight on how cities can adapt to climate change. In this session, they will give us insight on the management of water resources in relation to climate change, on the impact of urban growth on the management of water services, and the management of water services, and on the new insight of wastewater treatment plant as resource producer and no longer as waste generator to be managed. And finally, we will end this session with the in-situ monitoring of microbiological pollution. Before we start this session, some practical information. So I'll ask the speaker to respect the 15-minute time for the presentation. And if there is any question about the presentation, I ask the audience to post them on the chat, and I will be the reader of those questions at the end of the fourth presentation. So let's start with the first speaker. David Poinard is working at Eau du Grand Lyon, a company of Veolia. David Poinard holds a PhD in urban hydrology. His doctorate was on the management of drinking water networks. He has been director of the operation at Eau du Grand Lyon since 2015. David has been strongly involved in humanitarian issues since 2002 as a volunteer with the Veolia Foundation and the Red Cross. So David, the floor is yours.
Oui. Thank you, Mr. Moiron. I will present you in French. Et donc, merci à tous et à toute l'équipe.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to UNESCO. Thank you in advance to the interpreters. I'd like to make a presentation on how we can proceed with the qualitative and quantitative management of water resources in the Lyon metropole within the context of climate change. So I'll focus on two major aspects in particular, and they help us to adapt the way we work to climate change. First of all, I'll talk about concrete examples. How can we adapt water production? And secondly, what can smart cities methodology bring? So let's start with a brief presentation of the Lyon city. We have 59 communities, 1.3 million inhabitants. Their network is made of about 4,200 kilometers of water. This is a network. We have approximately 216,000 cubic meters per day. We have 114 wells pumping water from underground resources, and we use water from the Rhine River. And I think the slides are changing a bit too rapidly, but it doesn't really matter. So first of all, climate change poses several problems when it comes to quality and quantity of water resources. And when it comes to the temperature of water production, we can see that temperature peaks are even higher than before. It would be 20 degrees, whereas water distribution should not be at a temperature above 25 degrees. Don't go too fast when changing the slides, please. I'm not finished with that one. Thank you very much. Many studies prove that climate is becoming hotter in Lyon, for example, which is in the south of France. We can see that temperatures are going up near the Rhine River. The river's temperature is going up, and the outside temperature is also going up in Lyon. So we have to react and adapt ourselves. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So you can see results here on this slide.
Les résultats qui... Oui, non, c'était avant.
It was the one before that, the previous one. So the one before that, please. Yes, that's the one. Thank you very much. So the results you can see on the slide come from a PhD, and the first one is on the artificial basins. You can see them in light blue on the slide, and these basins are used to keep the right level for the water table. Now, the drawback is that they actually contribute to the increase in temperature during hot periods. So what we're trying to do is to limit the speed of infiltration, but it's not enough. So what we have done is to put special equipment to measure temperature. And if temperature goes above a threshold, pumping stops immediately, and pumping starts in colder areas. But this is a major problem. And the risk is that bacteria might develop around the wells that are not functioning. And the other problem is that temperatures might go up in all the basins. No, the slide before that, please. The one before. One more. That's the one. So we have decided to increase chlorine automatically. So when the temperature is above 19 degrees, we move from 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams per liter. And we do that in particular during the summer period. We adapt what we do constantly, and we do measurements continuously using two different techniques, because the quicker we get the results, the quicker we can actually react. Next slide, please. It's the one on Smart City. Thank you very much. So since 2015, in Lyon, we have entirely modernized our information system. We invested more than 11 million euros in our information system. We have added new new tools, and we have also invested in new captors in order to measure pressure and quality. What we're trying to do is to attain the right level of performance in terms of monitoring and quality, and to bring the right answers, to give the right answers to the client, because this is what is important. It has an impact on the consumption level, and make sure that we don't use too much water compared to the level of resources available. Now, what you can see on the right of the screen is the efforts we have been undertaken in order to simplify our system. We have improved our descriptive database, customers, technical equipment, software. Now, this is what you can see on the first part of this diagram. And then we also have a digital monitoring system. Monitoring is done entirely using digital tools. We have a report on all that is done. We have sensors and smartphones that are part of our equipment. Now, thirdly, all these data is sent to a storehouse, so that really enables us to improve the general performance of the whole system. Fourthly, it gives us all access to all our data. It's a single stop shop, and we're really trying to innovate. We have people within our teams who are specialized in analyzing and who can do predictions. And we also use outside data coming from the French National Meteorological System. We have, as of today, 360 performance indicators who are specially developed. Some of them can be used in real time and enable us to do predictions hourly or daily, well, depending on our needs.
Thank you. Ceci donc a considérablement changé nos façons d'opérer.
So this has entirely changed the way we actually operate, and we have already gained a lot of positive effects. We have really increased our efficiency. And what you can see here on the slide is the flow rate during night around 3 a.m. in the morning. That's from 2002 to today, as you could say, was 6,000 cubic meters per hour, and now it's around 4,000. And that was possible thanks to a lot of innovation. And then thanks to the meters, consumers can really adapt their consumption to their needs. And consumers use less water. The water consumption was reduced by 5% thanks to the new meters. So these are concrete examples of what can be done in order to fight against water overconsumption, and it has an impact on the fight against climate change. And finally, this is the slide on conclusions. So we have to be very careful because water resources are very vulnerable resources when it comes to quality and quantity. We have to adapt to changes. We have to anticipate future changes. This is very important for future generations, but it's important for us too. We have to use innovation. Innovation helps us improve the resilience of cities, of communities, and we have to fight against overconsumption. We have to be more sober when it comes to using water, and we have to work within the global warming, different global warming plans. Thank you very much. That's it with my presentation. Thank you very much, David, for your presentation. I'm very sorry for the technical difficulties, but we actually managed. The next presentation will be done by Melina Tobias. She works at the Buenos Aires University, and she specializes in policies and conflicts linked to water and in water resource management. Since 2009, she's been working on basin management, on drinking water supply, and on sanitation issues. And she focused on Buenos Aires. So Melina could not join us today, unfortunately, so she has prepared a video when we will listen.
Well, my name is Melina Tobias, and I will be presenting the paper that we wrote with Emilio Lentini on urban growth and water and sewage services in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, Argentina. First of all, thanks to the organizer of the Congress, the rest of the panelists with whom we shared the session, and all the participants. Unfortunately, we hadn't shown up for the recording of the presentation since the session time matched with another roundtable of the Congress where we need to assist with the live presentation. In order to respect the time given, I begin with the exposition. Well, the general aim of our paper is to analyze the challenges of urban water governance in Latin American cities, studying the case of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, Argentina. We analyze the way in which the dynamics of urban growth towards the peripheries areas implies greater pressures on water as a service, which means extension of networks, and water as a resource. This is exploitation of aquifers. Also, we intend to reflect on the challenges that this process entails for the water company in terms of service universalization. In order to do that, we describe the main measures carried out by ARCEAU, the principal company of water in the region, and the regulatory authorities to expand water and sewage services in the most deficient areas of the metropolitan area. We focus on the one hand in analyze the implication of new districts incorporation within the company's service area with different models of intervention and service quality. On the other hand, we study the measures developed by the national government and the water supply public company to provide services in slums and informal settlements within the concession area. The world population dynamics of the last 50 years shows a growing trend towards urbanization, which had led to more than 50% of the world population currently residing in cities. In Latin America, urban population arises up to 80%, and in Argentina, more than 90%. In Latin America, the urbanization process was and is unequal. This means that urban services are not evenly distributed. This disparity is not only expressed in socioeconomic terms, but also in spatial, environmental, and health aspects, giving rise to segregation and fragmentation processes. Thus, in Latin American cities, there are areas consolidated and provided with infrastructure networks where upper and middle social sector resides, and other environmentally degraded and generally devoid of network services where the poorest sectors live. The theoretical approach that we use in this paper is inspired in Graham and Marvin's concept of splintering urbanism, which shows how the role of networks infrastructure increases urban fragmentation. This framework evidenced the existence of bypass strategies of urban developers and service operators to extend services to rich peripheral areas without entering to poor neighborhoods. And also the way in which the restriction on access to the service for low-income population historically has been justified by regulatory frameworks that require land tenure and technical arguments on slums and informal settlements' urban characteristics. In consequence, the design and expansion of the water and sewage networks in the region reveal a scenario characterized not by an integrated network connecting different areas, but by the image of infrastructure archipelagos where formal and informal service provision overlap. To fulfill the aim of this paper, we choose to work with primary and secondary sources. Regarding the former, we conducted in-depth interviews with water professionals from different state organisms and technical and academic experts from the sector. Regarding secondary sources, we had gathered and analyzed resolutions and regulations of the water company and the regulatory entities, as well as index data and statistics. The AMBA of the Metropolitan Area of Buenos Aires represents the urban territory comprised by the city of Buenos Aires and 24 municipalities or districts of the Greater Buenos Aires, located around the city in forms of rings or crowns. In the AMBA live more than 30 million people and is the most densely populated area in the country. It is estimated that due to the pandemic economic impacts, poverty in this area reached 50% of the population. In this territory, the average of water supply reached 76% of households and 57% in the case of sewage drains. However, these values are not uniform for the whole territory. The city of Buenos Aires presents a coverage close to 100%, while in the most peripheral municipalities of the region, water supplies is around 30% and sewage only 10%. Socio-spatial inequality in access to network is not only manifested in the most remote districts, the most peripheral ones, but also in slums and informal settlements of the metropolitan area. More than 100 informal neighborhoods are located in the AMBA. Only 50% of these have drinking water services and 4% sewage drains. As we said in the beginning, in this presentation, we would like to analyze two major challenges that the water company ARCEAU currently faces in relation to the universalization of the service. This means the expansion of the concession area to peripheral and deficit areas and the provision in slums and settlements. Since 2016, ARCEAU expanded its area of competence, covering now practically the entire metropolitan area. It began with 17 districts, and now it has more than the 24 of the metropolitan area. The incorporated districts, where lives more than 3 million people, that double the population of the original area of concession of the ARCEAU, correspond to peripheral areas with high levels of poverty, especially slums and informal settlements, and low coverage of services. On the new area, only 38% of the population have water supply networks and 27% have access to sewage. The main problem regarding the service in this area, previously in charge of a provincial public company, included structural deficient facilities, lack of maintenance of the existing infrastructures, water supply continuity and pressure problems, and especially quality problems of water linked to underground water resources. Faced with this situation, ARCEAU, a state company in charge now of the services, had to prepare a water quality regularization plan distributed in new incorporated areas that included measures to ensure that and improve in the short, medium, and long term the water quality of the new districts. At first, the main strategy analyzed by ARCEAU was to extend large drinking water pipes in order to partially or totally replace the use of groundwaters and only use superficial water, sources. The main limitation of this expansion logic, which is specific and historical of the operating company, is the problem of temporality and large infrastructure works. This situation leads to the question of how to reconcile the times required by great infrastructure works with the critical and urgent health situation. Besides, it is important to note that the Argentinian macroeconomic context associated with high levels of volatility, periodic shocks, crises, and high inflation strongly conditions the financing and execution of large-scale infrastructure works. Thus, large infrastructures, works, and investment processes in Argentina are exposed to high macroeconomic risks. Regarding the problem of the expansion in slums and settlements, in AMBA lives more than 1.2 million people in this territory, in slums and informal settlements. They all face problems related to water and sanitation problems. Sorry. Yeah. In turn, in many cases, this is compounded by the need to share the bathroom with other households. In the slums, here we call villas, which are generally within or close to the area served by ARCEAU, so the city of Buenos Aires and the first round of district near the city, the predominant strategy for getting water supply is through self-built networks and clandestine connection to the company's network outside the perimeter of the neighborhood. They face frequent problems of low pressure and possible contamination of pipes with sewage effluents and soil pollution. Unlike the villas, in the more peripheral areas, informal settlements, the most popular water supply source is groundwater, which is accessed through individual perforations. In these cases, the main problem is the depth of the wells, since in some areas it is necessary to reach 60 meters to obtain quality water. Besides, the problems in the electrical connection of these households directly affect accessibility to water, since without electricity, the motor pumps that facilitate the extraction of water stop working. Historically, the service operation in the AMBA have been reluctant to expand water and sewage services to the interior of the villas and informal settlements. Until 2017, the company's regulatory framework exempts it from providing services to these territories, since they were areas without land property regularization, which represented a basic requirement for the formal expansion of infrastructure networks. However, the creation of the National Registry of Popular Neighborhoods, the RENAVAP, and the Social-Urban Integration Law in 2017 implied modifications that facilitate access to all public services. Specifically, the novelty of RENAVAP represents for AISA that families residing in informal settlements and in villas can demand to public service companies the supply of basic services. These regulatory changes have implied certain flexibility from the water company to cover different situations in informal settlements. However, there are still pending gaps, such as the case of the villas in the city of Buenos Aires. In these territories, AISA does not assume responsibility for the service operation. This leads to a complex institutional framework where in the same neighborhoods, different actors can intervene in the water and sewage supplies with different economic and technical resources, and without clear planning, regulation, and control frameworks that guarantee an adequate provision of the service. Besides regulatory recent changes, other mechanisms that AISA has been developing to extend the service in informal settlements are the programs Agua Más Trabajo, so water and work, and Cloaca Más Trabajo, sewage plus work, which have their origin in the previous private company of water, Aguas Argentinas. These plans involve the creation of water and sewage network through the combined work of AISA and neighborhood cooperatives. Despite the progress that these programs suppose, the networks built by the cooperatives, local cooperatives, requires control and supervision mechanisms, not only in the construction, but also in the maintenance, in order to guarantee a service comparable to the received through the company's infrastructure works, mechanisms that in many cases have not been implemented. At the same time, it should be noted that the benefits of the extension of networks to these neighborhoods, mainly in the case of sewers, are not fully exploited. This is so because the connection to the public networks, as well as the intra-domiciliary facilities require, are responsibility of the new users and not to the company. And in many cases, the families cannot connect, either because of the high cost that this work represents for the households or due to ignorance of the benefits of the works. So that show insufficient diffusion of the works. So what is the things that we try to show in this paper? The document shows the role played by water and sanitation infrastructure networks in the production and reproduction of inequalities in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. We seek to demonstrate the huge unsatisfied demands still persisting, as well as the challenges for public organisms to overcome the service deficits in the short term. The network of institutional and regulatory competences, as well as the attitudes and different management cultures ingrained in the main governmental actors, actors, sorry, so AISA, the public company, and the provincial and municipalities authorities have delayed effective solutions. Without leaving aside as a limiting external factor the economic evolution of the country, which affects the continuity of the investment and maintenance processes of the infrastructure, particularly that of water and sewage. Although a constructive vision could recognize some progress, such as the water plus work, agua más trabajo, and sewage plus work, cloaca más trabajo programs, the RENAVAP, the socio-economic integration plans, the urbanization and integration policies of the population residing in villas and informal settlements, the relaxation or the flexibility of restrictions for extended networks in informal neighborhoods, the relative improvement of the services in the new districts of the metropolitan area, all this process has been slow, partial, and insufficient. It is essential that the public water supply company and the government authorities involved establish universal access to water and sewage services as a priority, focused on the villas and slums and informal settlements. To this end, this purpose must be specifically stated in the respective state policies and consequently in the allocation of budgetary financial resources. This is all the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And I will leave my email. So if you have answers, as I cannot be in the live presentation, you can write me and I will be happy to answer all the questions about the paper. Thank you very much.
Donc, comme Mélina vous l'a rappelé,
as Melina reminded you, she couldn't be with us here today. So if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to send them to her by email and she'll answer you. The next presentation will be done by Laurent Brunet, who is the technical director since 2015 at Suez, France, where he's responsible for part of defining labor standards, for technical support and for control measures of different technical measures, as well as technical risk management. And he will give us their vision of wastewater treatment plants and their management.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much, Régis. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm here to talk about resources recovery at wastewater treatment plants. It's true, as the technical director working for SIAAP, I work on several projects when it comes to resources recovery at wastewater treatment plants. And what I wanted to do today is to share with you some general ideas on the issue. So following a brief introduction, I'll take stock of the resources available at a wastewater treatment plant. I will also draw the list of what I believe are levers for success or what can actually facilitate the recovery of these resources. And I will do the same for obstacles, for barriers to resources recovery, and I will draw some conclusions. Next, thank you. Now, to start with, I'd like to say that in the history of wastewater treatment and sanitation, we can see that successive questions were asked and answers were found. The first question concerns health and hygiene. How was it possible to protect human beings from diseases carried by dirty water? And for centuries, the answer was, well, to take sewage far away from population and settlements. Second question, which complemented the first one, environment protection, and in particular, the protection of water environments, because these water environments didn't have enough capacity to absorb all the wastewater discharge into them. So that was the whole issue behind the building of wastewater treatment plants in the last century. And I think that today we are confronted with a third question. I'm not saying here that the two first questions have received exhaustive answers, not at all. It's just that we have a third question that complements the first two ones. That's the issue of circular economy. How can we recover resources from wastewater of urban areas? We know that resources are becoming scarce, and that is why we have more and more to think about building a circular economy. So when we talk about resources, available resources in wastewater treatment plants, what are we talking about? The first one, the most obvious one, is water. Now, of course, when we're talking about wastewater treatment plants, we have water everywhere. That's where we send all the sewage, all the wastewater. So this is where we find water all the time. And when water stress is becoming more and more important, and we heard that in the previous presentation, the question of the permanent availability of water resources is particularly acute. And that's also where water quality is maintained. It's can be more or less easily controlled. So this is very valuable, and following complementary treatment, water can be used to water fields, to water green areas. There are many different types of uses that are important. Now, in order to recover water treated in wastewater treatment plants, there are three major issues here. First, you have the health issue. Users need to get all the guarantees when it comes to the quality of the water. The user has to trust the water quality, and we have to make sure that the quality of the water is sufficient. Secondly, we have economic issues at stake because it's costly to treat water. So we have to find the right balance between applying a technical solution and the value of available water. So the issue here is really striking the right balance. So that is an economical issue. And then there's a third issue that has to be taken into consideration: environmental issues. If we want to recover resources from wastewater treatment plants, we must make sure that this water is used efficiently. When water are particularly low, water can be used to increase the level in rivers. Now, we have to be very careful the way we use the water we actually recover. So we have three major issues here: health issues, environmental issues, and cost issues. And answers have to be found to these three questions. And when it is the case, then it's possible to use this type of water in order to fight against the impact of climate change. Now, the second kind of resource available at the wastewater treatment plant is energy. Energy comes from the anaerobic digestion of sludge, and this generates biogas. This process, the digestion of sludge, is a process that has been known for many decades now, and the technologies used at water treatment plants are very immature. What is new today is that when the first digesters were installed at treatment plants, the objective was to reduce the quantity of sludges. Now, biogas was produced. Part of it was used within the treatment plant to keep the temperature at the right level, and the rest of it was actually burnt. So in rare cases, maybe that was the exception, but the main objective was not to use the biogas that was produced by the process. But today, this biogas can be re-injected into the gas network. Now, of course, we have to treat it first, but it is a possibility. Another option is to co-generate it to create a mix of heat and other types of energy. There are many different potential uses, which means that we have to think over the way the water treatment plants are being designed in order to optimize the production of biogas, which means that in the future, if this is one of our objectives, the way treatment plants are designed will have to change. Now, what is at stake here? Well, here again, it's finding the right balance between the cost of such solutions and the value assigned to the energy being generated. So in large treatment plants, it's easier to find the right balance. And we have to define the critical size of treatment plants. And the critical size should decrease. And of course, there are environmental issues. Of course, we're talking here about methanization, and we're talking about innovative processes being installed in order to optimize energy generation at wastewater treatment plants. And the third resources are the fertilizers. We can use them differently. First of all, then we have liquid sludges. Now, in many places, we'll still use sludge. We spread them in fields, and farmers actually like it because it's a good way of treating soils and adding rich material to soils. A second way of using fertilizers is to add it to a compost, and in order to produce a compost that can be used again to improve soils. And then, of course, the issue here is a health issue. Farmers who will use this product must be sure of the fact that the product they use is safe and that traceability is possible. So we have to define the right standards for these products and establish the right rules when it comes to traceability and monitoring. And in water treatment plants, we already have the necessary technology to recover phosphorus. Phosphorus is becoming scarce. It's a raw material that is depleting fast, and wastewater is a real source of phosphorus. So it's very interesting to recover phosphorus at wastewater treatment plants. Now, these were tangible resources: water, energy, fertilizers. There are other resources that are more intangible, or at least less tangible, and they're still very interesting. The first one is data, talking about health or epidemiological data. In wastewater, you have all the pathogens discharged by the inhabitants of a given area. So by analyzing the pathogens, by analyzing the elements in wastewater, you get very interesting data on the health of the population. This is particularly true today. Many analyses are conducted in order to find traces of the COVID-19 virus. We talk a lot about that nowadays. And a few projects were carried out before that. They were less well known. For example, there was a project designed to look for traces of drugs in wastewater to see if it had an impact on the behavior of the population. So data is an intangible resource in a way, and it's very important for health issues. There's a second type of intangible resource, that is environmental services. And I'm talking here about human areas that can be created near the point of exit of water treatment plants. It can be biodiversity areas, and there can be areas where education, well, environmental education can be organized. So this is what we can find at wastewater treatment plants. What can we do to facilitate the recovery of these resources? Well, first of all, there's growing public awareness. You have here a picture. I said a few minutes ago that a few decades ago, we would burn, flare biogas. Today, it would not be socially acceptable because today, for obvious reasons, we're trying to use renewable resources. So it's not acceptable anymore to flare biogas. So growing public awareness. Second level, an improvement in the way sanitation systems work. The controls are better. There are less direct industrial waste. Industries treat their waste before discharging them in the sanitation network, which means that in the wastewater that reach treatment plants, we have less undesirable substances than a few decades ago. We have less heavy metals, for example. This is what study shows. So that means that the quality of wastewater has improved and control is getting better. We know better where, we know better what wastewater contains, which means that the sludge or the water being treated is of better quality. So this was the second lever. Third one, I did mention it very quickly, technological development and technical developments too. I said a few words about methanization and the way these recovery techniques have been improved. And the fourth lever is, well, the development of rules and legal frameworks. In France, for example, text on circular economy was adopted at the European level. Texts were adopted in order to regulate the use of sludge in fields. So these are the main levers that can be used in order to improve resource recovery. Now, of course, there are obstacles. The first one is the economic viability of the projects. It's finding the right balance between the cost of the projects and the value of the resources recovered. Now, of course, as the recovered resources are in competition with primary resources, for example, biogas produced at wastewater treatment plants is competing with natural biogas, which is not very expensive, and I would dare to say not expensive enough. So it's not always easy to find the right economic balance. Second barrier, second obstacle, there seems to be a contradiction between environmental issues, pushing for circular economy, and health concerns, talking about micropollutants. I'm not saying here that we have more micropollutants, it's just that we measure them better, we can identify them better, and so concerns are going up. Third obstacle, cultural reluctance. When we talk about wastewater, the image we get are not really positive. Debates can be very important. So there is a cultural reluctance, even though the situation is developing in the right direction. And the more we see resources being depleted, the easier it will be to overcome this cultural obstacle. Now, the fourth barrier would be rules and regulations. Some existing regulations really have an impact and make it more difficult to develop resource recovery projects. So to conclude, how can we go forward? Well, we have to try to overcome the different obstacles. And I have here 6 ideas that I would like to share with you. The first 2 ones are more technical in nature. For example, increase in the knowledge, knowing more about micropollutants, about their toxicity, going even further when it comes to technology, coming up with more efficient and more productive technologies, using clear tools that enable us to evaluate the environmental impact of the different projects and try to reach the right balance between the different objectives of the project. So these are the more technical conclusions. And then there are issues around governance, improving the management of sanitation systems so that trust in these systems builds up in order to overcome existing reluctance and communicate and share information on these issues in all transparency and in the clearest way possible. And of course, there has to be a very clear political commitment so that sanitation becomes part of the circular economy. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here to answer your questions, should there be any. Well, thank you very much, Laurent, for this presentation. Thank you for this exhaustive presentation on the different resources that can be recovered at wastewater treatment plants. So we have no questions so far, and we will move on to the last presentation by Dan Angelescu. He is the chair of Fluidion, and he's also the director of R&D. And he has been working on the development of sensors to measure water quality in situ, as well as in other contexts. And he has a PhD in physics that he got in Princeton in 2003, and he conducted research in the Paris University. So Dan, you have the floor to make your presentation. You're alone, right? Olivier is not with you.
You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Regis, for this introduction. I'm going to be speaking in French. Like the other presentations, I had the choice between English and French, and I'm going to be speaking French today. So this is a joint work between Fluidion and Sepia Conseil, and it's a work on the development of a new methodology and instrumentation for in situ microbiological risk assessment. What's the goal? The E. coli measurements can be used to evaluate water health risks and to measure the impact in rivers, the impact of different waste waters that could be contaminated by various pathogens. These can be monitored thanks to fecal matter contamination bacteria. The urban pollution can be complex with many confounding variables and different sources. In dry weather, in wet weather, there can be bad connections to the networks in certain conditions, and certain units might not be treating their wastewater, such as many canal boats in the Greater Paris area. When it comes to water, it can be stormwater from which can lead to lots of pollution in the area. So it could be diffuse pollution, and there's also punctual pollution. And all these variables can be combined. So the models are often simplified and lack the input data in order to carry out good qualitative forecasts. The traditional point sampling methods, so taking samples every few days, are not necessarily representative when it comes to diffuse pollution or for punctual pollution. So the current methods are inadequate to be able to carry out long-term monitoring of bacteria. What's missing, among other things, is in situ data. Right now, a lot of studies are done in the labs on samples that are taken in situ, but the results are received several days or even several weeks later. So there's considerable delay. So I'll present to you a case of measuring the impact of the pollution effects of canal boats, of live-in canal boats, who have different onboard water treatment systems. And this is all in the Greater Paris area on the Marne River. Now, why is it important to carry out these pollution assessments? First of all, because as we've heard a lot in previous sessions, we've been talking a lot about swimming in waterways in the Paris area, in the Marne, in the Seine. And so if you are to be in contact with water, water has to be of the sufficient quality not to represent health risks. This quality is monitored according to the fecal contamination bacteria. Water quality is also crucial when it comes to sporting events such as the 2024 Olympic Games, which will have several events that will take place directly in the river. So at present, we don't have a clear measure for live-in boat, canal boat pollution. It's not easy to measure such pollution. And so a real impact study and also a study on the different efficiency of different onboard treatment measures is something that was necessary. So we carried out this study with Sepia Conseil on a group of boats that was representative, since there were different systems for managing black water or gray water on these boats. We were near Saint-Maur, the town of Saint-Maur, on the River Marne. And you can see an aerial view of the group of 5 boats that were used for the study we carried out. You can also see the position outflow 1 and 2 of 2 sewage outputs from the town. There was an important outflow when it came to outflow 1 and a more mitigated lower outflow on outflow 2. So we carried out the study on the boats that were above outflow 1 because that would have impacted the results of our study. When it comes to the instruments used, we used a set of instruments, a remote-controlled boat, which allowed us to collect several samples in different positions in the river. We could collect samples that were on the river Marne, and we could collect samples that were on outflow 1 and 2. We carried out the study on the boats that were above outflow 1 because that would have impacted the results of our study. When it comes to the instruments used, we used a set of instruments, a remote-controlled boat, which allowed us to collect samples in different positions in the river. We could collect samples that were on board the boats and in the middle of the river as well, or between the different boats. We used rapid biological analysis using the alert lab, which is portable, and the fluidion alert system, which is in situ, which was installed on site and carried out measures at different times of the day over the course of 1 month. We also analyzed images using an aerial drone with an onboard camera, and also carried out measures of wastewater dilution using a system of cameras with filters in order to carry out quantitative fluorometric analysis. The first phase of the study was composed of a dispersion study. The 5 boats at a specific moment emptied out their wastewater into the water, and fluorescein was added to the wastewaters before this water was flushed out. The fluorescein is then finds itself in the river, and thanks to the concentration of fluorescein in the water, we can then we can calculate the factor of dilution of the various water rejections. We can then measure the different factors of dilution and compare it with the various concentrations of bacteria to understand how different types of water then disperse on a surface of several hundred meters. In order to do this, we carried out a study of fluorescein concentration in time. And I'll show you the comparators we used in a later slide. We also carried out E. coli measurements. Here you have several aerial views of the experiment. This is the Anaval riverboat, which is the last one. And you can see at time point 0, this was before the flushing out of the wastewater and the fluorescein. And then you can see the different points at which the fluorescein spread through the water. And so by the last frame, you can see that most of the pollution is already gone. You can also see the position of the drone, which was about 5 meters further around the middle of the river. And it was placed there in order to see how the fluorescein was diffused, not only along the boats, but also on a perpendicular axis to the boats. This is the dilution factor determination of the fluorescein. It was mixed with the Marne water to avoid the presence of parasitic fluorescence. So thanks to this comparator, we could compare it to its close neighbors to define the dilution factors. This graph gives you the results of the first stage of this study, the dispersion study. The blue line is the concentration of detected fluorescein. You can see that at the moment when the waters are released into the river simultaneously, this is the flush moment that is shown by an arrow on the graph. And then afterwards, you can see various peaks, which is when the various ships released different waters. There's a 5th one that's lowest, and this is the moment when the last boat released its wastewater. This is a specific moment because it had a large 1 cubic meter reservoir, 1 square cubic meter tank. And we could see that there's no concentration of E. coli, but you can see the impact of this large cubic meter tank where the concentrations rise above from 1,600 to around 2,700, 1,600 being the average concentration level. We carried out some calculations to control the coherence of these measures. For the gray waters, we compared different types of gray waters, and we also compared the wastewaters that were in this cubic meter tank. And we got values that were from about 1 million E. coli bacteria by 100 milliliters. Then we calculated the dilution factors and multiplied it, or divide the initial concentration by the division factor. And we got a result between 500 E. coli by 100 milliliters. And we can see that we actually got a confirmation that the measures we took were coherent between the models were made and what was carried out in situ. We then started the second phase of the project, which was the long-term monitoring of the bacterial concentrations during a whole month when people were going about their normal lives on the boat. So we tried to do these measurements at unexpected moments, different moments when people were taking their showers in the morning, in the middle of the day, in the evening, when people were working, when people weren't there, to see if we could observe periods when pollution would be stronger than others. The photos can show you the two analyzers that were placed upstream and downstream. And you can see that they were remote controlled and were placed next to the boats, and they could remotely transmit their data. Here you can see the two measures. Adonis is the upstream one and Mindanao is the downstream one. And in the blue bars represent rainfall. And so you can see that there are concentration peaks in both systems after rainfall. So you can see there's a few important rainfall days at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And then you can see there are periods of dry weather, and at that time the concentrations of bacteria diminish. But what you can also see, and this is quite surprising, is that the downstream concentrations are slightly weaker, slightly lower than the upstream ones. Now, why would it be so? Would it mean that the boats actually don't contribute to pollution and they absorb it? Of course, that couldn't be the case. But what it means is that compared to other factors, the pollution that we calculated according to the wastewater that was rejected by these canals was weaker than other factors. You have 2 minutes. Yes, okay, I'm nearly done. So one thing that we observed is that upstream for the first boat, there was a high accumulation of debris that was accumulated just above the boats, just upstream. And so when this debris would go down past the analyzers, and of course this debris contains lots of wastewater, including fecal matter, dog waste, for example, that could be washed down by rainfall. And this is what contributes to the slightly higher concentrations of bacteria measured upstream compared to the measures downstream. But it really does highlight some of the problems with this type of study, and that is that factors that can disrupt this kind of study are varied in nature, and these kind of factors can have a far more significant impact than the source of pollution that we thought we were measuring in the first place. Another important thing is that the pollution from the quayside, from the land, was more important than we thought they would be. Does this mean? Of course not. They do have to treat their waste water. But what's most important, and if we look at the last slide, is that we developed a robust technology that is consistent, that when it comes to comparing the model and the experience, that uses many innovative instruments in order to evaluate the short and long impacts of different types of pollution. And this is a a pollution that is somewhere between punctual localized pollution and diffuse pollution. It's a localized pollution, but it goes along the whole length of the boat. So it's a bit between the two different types of pollution. And the tools and methodologies we've developed allows us to apply these measures to complex sites, such as swimming areas or sporting event areas. And just last slide to thank our sponsors. And you can see our email addresses on this slide in case you have any questions about the work that we carried out. There's also a paper that came out last year in Technique Science Méthode that deals with the results of this study. So thank you very much, and I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you, Dan, for this presentation, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. So I'll start, first of all, by asking two questions about David's presentation. The first one was more an ask for clarification, or they were wondering if when the temperature went up to 19 degrees, did you increase or decrease the chlorination level?
We increase it. Second question. Could you say more concerning these new emitters and what do they enable you to do? And I'd like to complement that question with my own. Here in France, consumers were concerned when it comes to the installation of electric meters. Yes, well, with these meters, we can get 2 indices per day, whereas before that, we only had 1 per year for households, which means that we can calculate the daily yield in a way. So that's a major progress. And within these matters, within the equipment itself, there is a certain temperature. So that tells us whether the meter is about to freeze or not, and we can actually alert the client. So it enables us to avoid emitters from freezing. Before that, 3,000 meters would freeze per day, and customers had to pay to replace these meters, which was not very good. Another advantage is that it allows us to know whether there's a leak after the meter, and that's very interesting. We can analyze the flow rate with thresholds, which the customer can actually determine himself. And then Regis, when it comes to a customer's reluctance, out of the 400,000 customers, well, we received about 1,000 letters and about only 500 letters saying they did not want these meters to be installed. Now, why are customers more sensitive when it comes to electrical meters compared to water meters? That really would be interesting to know why. Thank you very much for your answer. There are also questions on Laurent's presentation. First question is the following. As long as sanitation is seen as a source of pollution, the more it will cost, but the situation will change when wastewater treatment plants are considered as working towards environmental solutions. Well, it's actually doing both. That's linked to the 3 questions I put at the beginning of my presentation. That is hygiene, reducing pollutants, and contributing to circular economy. And I think that is what is important for customers to understand. It's important to have this double vision and this double approach. I'd like to come back to the issue of the different resources and the issue of competition, because we're really at the end of the network of what comes to the treatment plant. And you talked about phosphorus recovery. And there's the, we could also talk about urine. Do you think that both can be combined, or is there going to be some kind of difficult competition? No. As it is often the case for these projects, it's impossible to impose global rules. Projects relating to water and water management are local. They're implemented on the local level. So every single area has to come up with their own answer. It depends on the density of population. So I think that all solutions have to be investigated, have to be considered, and every single time it's a trade-off. And it's true there are projects concerning urine. Now we're talking about existing plants. We're not going to transform all the existing plants. So maybe we should talk more about coexistence. And I think that's what is going to be the case for very long years to come. There's another question I saw in the chat. Jean-Louis Janac was actually asking himself a question concerning the wastewater being transformed into drinking water. And what are the regulatory issues concerning that? Can we talk about a Jourdain project? I think it's in Poitiers. Yep. Using treated water as drinking water. Well, actually, that's what we're doing for decades, because water treatment plants actually discharge treated water in rivers, and then further down the river, water is pumped to be treated in order to be used in households. So when we're talking about water, we're always talking about a cycle. So wherever you position yourself in the cycle, you're always upstream or downstream. Now, for me, what would be more difficult is, like Windhoek, is to use it directly. Regulation is still far behind, because we're always working in stages. First, we're going to regulate the different uses in sequence. A lot has already been done in order to harmonize regulations at the European level. We have a common, we'll have common rules now when it comes to field spreading. Now, in France, efforts are being undertaken in order to regulate some specific uses. So the idea is to have regulatory frameworks that can be extended gradually, and to reuse directly treated water, to reuse it directly as drinking water. There's still quite a lot of work to do. Thank you very much. Now we have two questions for Dan this time. First question on the presentation. When, in what year, and did you start this project, and why? Well, the development of our first microbiologic analyzer date back to 2016, and it's following a demand we received from Los Angeles. And then, as we had a solution that seemed to work quite well, the SIAAP, a French company in charge of water, wastewater treatment plants in the Paris region, contacted us. And so we worked with the SIAAP laboratory, and we have the installment of pilot projects. And then we have we signed a contract with the Paris authorities for the Villette district. There are several sites along the Seine River that are being pre-selected for the Olympic Games in 2024, and we also worked on sites that could be used for bathing purposes. And we also worked with Marneville, a city which actually tested our system. And we'll have also worked with the regulatory agencies in the UK, for example, with the environmental agency, which actually works on water quality in bathing areas. And we also work with the US. And since 2019, we have a European project. We have partners in Berlin, in Milan, and in Paris. Well, in Paris, we work with the SIAAP and another partner. In Berlin, we work with the Water Quality Institute. And this institute actually tries to improve their prediction models to see whether it's possible to swim in the Spree River. So a lot of work has been done, and we work with several different partners. Thank you very much. Now, I have a personal question. It's a more technical question. Now, you talked about fluorescein, but why didn't you try to do the same thing on conductivity? Very good. We could have, indeed, but we cannot measure within the same range. Here, we're talking about a dilution factor of 10 to the power of -3 or even -6. Now, when it comes to conductivity, it would have been necessary to saturate the river with a salt, and for obvious reasons, it would have a major impact on the environment and wouldn't have been possible to measure the same levels of dilution. Thank you very much, Dan. We have questions on the first presentation about these meters. Are they used generalized in France?
It really depends on the area. It's the local authorities that have to ask for it, and then we can deploy these counters. And then there's various technologies in existence, be this at Suez or other companies who have counters and technologies and solutions which are also remotely controlled. But there are more and more towns that are interested by this technology of having this remotely transmitted counters, because we can see this in new client services and also in environmental services, because this allows us to better manage, to more precisely manage effectiveness, efficiency, to better understand people's consumption, their leaks, and to really be able to have a different point of view when it comes to each individual's person's consumption and habits, and then everyone can also carry out their own studies and criticisms and can check their own consumption in a way that's much more precise than it was in the past, when people used to just get one result per year. Thank you. I have a question for Laurent. And when you were talking about the intangible resources, and in particular all the data and information that can be provided through this data. Now we are using wastewaters more and more as an indicator of how towns are evolving, but shouldn't this also be accompanied with some awareness raising or educating activities? Because if we don't do that, then the general public might not really understand what it means if we say that, for example, there's COVID DNA in the water. No, yeah, you're absolutely right. The cultural aspect is important. Wastewater contain pollutants, and that's what they're there for. That's their role. They are wastewater. So it's normal that there should be a lot of things that are maybe not so nice in the water. And that's why we do need to have to be able to explain what we are able to control and manage and in a waste treatment plant. And when it comes to micropollutants, it's not so much about whether they exist or not, because they're everywhere. They're in the water, they're in the air that we're breathing now. But the idea is to figure out what is the associated risk. So beyond the presence of a given pollutant, we need to ask ourselves, what risk does it represent for the population? And that's where there's a lot of work to be done to educate in a very transparent manner so that people's ideas on this can become clearer. And when we've talked about the COVID virus in the water, we're pretty sure that these are DNA traces, but that there's no actual active virus in the water. But this hasn't been proven completely. It's not 100% sure. But the data that has been supplied, there still needs to be more work carried out with sewage analysis. But this work has to be carried out, and then the knowledge from these analyses has to be shared. And then once we have this knowledge, then good decisions can be taken based on it. So the time is ticking. So I'll have to ask you a last question, Adan, about what you said about something you mentioned in your study. You said when you measure E. coli, they're not always of human origin. Have you thought, or have you maybe already done this, of trying to sequence the DNA to be able to distinguish which E. coli bacteria are of animal origin and which are of human origin? This is a possibility, but DNA sequencing is something that takes a long time. It can be done, and also has a certain associated cost. There are human markers that are sometimes more visible. There's certain viruses that are more specific. For example, in the US, there's a marker that's used, which is a virus that exists in chili, in peppers that are consumed by humans. And this pepper virus is then correlated with human fecal matter. And so there's different methods that exist. And presently we're working on in situ measurement methods for measuring the nucleic acid so that we can measure some of these human markers directly. But it's still in a rather early phase of research. Thank you, Dan. So the time's going by, and so we need to respect our session's timing, and so I'll close it, and I finish with a message of hope. Now, of course, we're all rather depressed now because of the COVID crisis, and the 4 presentations we've heard today, they do seem to be a bit of a ray of hope, because we can see that there's a lot of solutions that exist today that we can use to better manage our water, and that there are solutions that are sufficiently robust today. And I think this is something that is very promising. And so we should end on this positive note and tell ourselves that the goal now is to implement these methods in as many cases as possible, and to be able to have as many exchanges of information as possible, thanks to the results that we'll get thanks to these different to this work. And I'd like to thank all 4 of you, including our Latin American friend who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but sent their video in. And I'll give the floor to Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moiron, and all speakers for the very interesting presentation today. And thank you very much, dear participants, for your attention and your interest. We wish you a good evening, and we will see you tomorrow for another presentation.
Notre époque connaît des changements sans précédent. L'activité humaine augmente, les villes s'étendent. Aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, l'eau a besoin de nous. Le traitement de l'eau, c'est notre responsabilité. Une histoire d'hommes, de femmes, faite d'engagement et de savoir-faire. C'est notre histoire au SIAAP. Nous collectons, transportons et dépolluons les eaux usées de 9 millions de franciliens. Notre réseau de 440 km de canalisation est géré en temps réel, avec des outils de prévision et de régulation qui nous permettent d'anticiper toutes les situations et d'optimiser la gestion des flux. 7 jours sur 7, 24 heures sur 24. Chaque jour, dans nos usines, nous traitons 2,5 millions de mètres cubes d'eau usée. Grâce à un savoir-faire et des équipements uniques en Europe. Notre vision est durable, tournée vers le long terme. Nous nous engageons à développer notre activité industrielle de manière responsable. Nous investissons régulièrement dans la modernisation de nos usines et dans le développement de solutions innovantes et protectrices de l'environnement. Chacun de nous, dans son métier, se sent porteur du service public et de l'intérêt général, au service de notre mission, la préservation du milieu naturel et de la biodiversité. Au SIAAP, nous sommes fiers d'être une entreprise publique forte de 40 ans d'expérience au service de l'agglomération parisienne. Et nous sommes plus de 1700 agents à partager cet engagement et cette passion. Pour aujourd'hui et pour demain.